Chapter 1. Homecoming Shadows. The C-130 Hercules touched down at Dover Air Force Base with a bone-jarring thud that Randall Gillespie barely felt. After 18 months in Afghanistan, the familiar sensation of solid American ground beneath his boots should have brought relief. Instead, a knot of unease twisted in his stomach as he shouldered his duffel bag and walked across the tarmac. Master Sergeant Gillespie had served 3 tours of duty, each one taking its toll, but this last deployment had been different. The encrypted emails from Diana had grown shorter, colder. Phone calls became infrequent, then stopped altogether. When he tried calling their landline, a stranger's voice had answered, a man who'd quickly hung up when Randall identified himself. At 34, Randall had spent more time in desert combat zones than in his own home. His marriage to Diana Calhoun had been a whirlwind romance. They'd met at a military ball in San Antonio 5 years ago. She was a stunning brunette with emerald eyes and a laugh that could light up a room. He was a decorated soldier fresh from his second tour, still carrying shrapnel scars from an IED blast in Kandahar. Diana had seemed enchanted by his stories, his dedication to service. She'd married him 6 months later in a ceremony that made the local newspaper's society page. But Randall had noticed changes even before this deployment. Diana had grown restless, making comments about playing second fiddle to the army and questioning why he couldn't just get a normal job. The taxi ride from the base to their house in the upscale Riverside neighborhood took 40 minutes. Randall stared out the window at the familiar streets, noting new developments and changes. Their 2-story colonial home sat on a quiet cul-de-sac, its white picket fence and manicured lawn a picture of suburban perfection, a dream Diana had insisted upon. As the taxi pulled away, Randall noticed something odd. Diana's BMW wasn't in the driveway, but there was a black Escalade parked across the street with tinted windows. The hair on the back of his neck prickled, a survival instinct honed by years of combat. He used his key to enter through the front door, calling out, "Diana? I'm home." The silence that greeted him felt wrong. The house was too clean, too empty. Walking through the rooms, he noticed Diana's personal items were missing, her jewelry box, family photos, even her favorite throw pillows. In their bedroom, Randall opened the closet to find it nearly empty except for his own clothes, still hanging exactly where he'd left them. Diana's side was bare hangers and dust. On the nightstand, he found a single piece of paper, a legal document that made his blood run cold. It was a restraining order, filed 3 weeks ago, claiming he had threatened her via email and phone calls. The order barred him from contacting Diana or approaching their shared residence. At the bottom, Diana's signature was accompanied by that of Jeremy Duke, ESQ, a lawyer Randall had never heard of. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Check your email. Time to face reality. D." The email contained photos that hit him like a physical blow. Diana in the arms of another man, someone Randall recognized from her social media posts as Calvin Joseph, a local real estate developer. The photos were taken in their bedroom, in their kitchen, on their couch. The timestamps showed they'd been taken throughout his deployment. But the final email was the worst. Diana had cleaned out their joint accounts, liquidated his military savings bonds, and somehow managed to get his name removed from the mortgage. According to the attached legal documents, the house now belonged solely to her. Randall's hands trembled as he read, not from fear, but from a cold rage he recognized from combat. Diana hadn't just cheated. She'd planned this military precision campaign to destroy him while he was serving his country. His phone rang. Diana's number. "Hello, soldier boy." Her voice dripped with false sweetness. "I see you found my little surprises." "Diana, what the hell is this?" "The restraining order, the accounts." "Oh, that's just the beginning, Randall. You see, Calvin and I have been planning your homecoming for months. Did you really think I'd just sit around waiting for you to decide our marriage was worth coming home to? I was serving my country. You were serving yourself." She spat, her mask slipping. "Always the hero, always the martyr. Well, heroes don't always get the girl in real life. Calvin's given me more attention in 6 months than you did in 5 years. Those are my savings bonds, Diana. Money I earned. Were earned, past tense. Calvin needed capital for a new development project. Consider it my divorce gift to myself." The line went dead. Randall sat on the edge of what had been their bed, processing the scope of her betrayal. Diana had used his deployment as cover to systematically dismantle his life. But she'd made one critical error. She'd underestimated who she was dealing with. In the army, Randall wasn't just any soldier. He was special operations, trained in psychological warfare, reconnaissance, and strategic planning. He'd helped topple enemy networks and extract valuable assets from hostile territory. Diana and her accomplices had just declared war on the wrong man. Outside, he noticed the black Escalade was still there. Through his bedroom window, he could see two figures inside. Diana wasn't taking any chances. She'd brought muscle to make sure her plan went smoothly. Randall smiled for the first time since landing. This was going to be interesting. Chapter 2. The Enemy Within. 2 days later, Randall sat in the cramped office of Buddy Eddy, a scrappy private investigator who specialized in divorce cases. Buddy was a former Marine who'd lost his leg in Iraq, but his network of contacts in law enforcement and the military community made him invaluable. "This is some grade A bullshit, Randy," Buddy said, spreading the legal documents across his desk. "Your wife and her boyfriend played this smart. The restraining order was filed in family court, where they're real sympathetic to claims of domestic abuse. The financial stuff, well, that's where it gets ugly." Buddy pulled out a thick file. "I did some digging on Calvin Joseph. Guy's a real piece of work. He's been married 3 times, and each ex-wife ended up broke while he kept all the assets. He's got a pattern: target married women with working husbands, seduce them, then help them fleece their spouses in the divorce. What about the house? Here's where your wife got creative. 2 months ago, she filed a quitclaim deed, supposedly signed by you, transferring your share of the property to her. The signature looks real good, probably practiced it for weeks." Randall examined the forged document. She always did have good handwriting. "There's more. Calvin Joseph owns a security company called Ironclad Protection Services. Guess who he's got protecting your house? The guys in the Escalade. Jeremy Duke and Lonnie Scott. Both ex-cons with assault records. Duke did time for armed robbery, Scott for aggravated battery. They're not just bodyguards, they're enforcers." Buddy leaned back in his chair. "Randy, I gotta ask, you thinking about doing something stupid?" Randall's expression remained neutral. "Define stupid." "The kind that lands you in Leavenworth. Look, I know you're pissed, and you got every right to be. But these people have covered their bases legally. You go in there swinging, and you're the one who ends up in cuffs. What do you suggest? Counterfile everything. Challenge the restraining order. Dispute the financial transactions. Report the forged deed. It'll take time, but how much time? 6 months, maybe a year. And that's if everything goes your way." Randall stood up. "I've got a better idea." That evening, Randall drove to O'Malley's, a dive bar popular with current and former military personnel. The bartender, a tattooed woman named Kelly Brooks, was another veteran who'd lost her arm in a roadside bombing. She poured Randall a whiskey without being asked. "Heard about your situation through the grapevine," she said, polishing a glass with her good hand. "Diana Gillespie's been running her mouth all over town about how she liberated herself from military oppression. She's been here. Few times with her new boyfriend. Real smug about it. Talked about how soldiers are just government puppets who abandon their families for glory." Randall's jaw tightened. "She say anything else?" Calvin Joseph bragged about his business model. Called it asset reallocation from suckers to smart people. Said he's done it 4 times now, and military guys are the easiest marks because they're never around to see it coming. At the end of the bar, a large man with graying temples looked up from his beer. Timothy Thompson was a 20-year veteran of the county sheriff's department and had served 2 tours in Vietnam. "Randy," he said, walking over. "Sorry to hear about your troubles. Diana and that boyfriend of hers have been making noise around town, talking about how they outsmarted a dumb jarhead. Anyone else know about this?" "Half the county, seems like." Calvin Joseph's not shy about his victories. "But here's the thing. I've been keeping an ear out, and there's something else you should know." Timothy glanced around, then lowered his voice. "Calvin's got another mark lined up. Rich Cunningham's wife, Stella. Rich is deployed in Syria right now, and Calvin's been sniffing around Stella for the past month. Same playbook." Randall felt a surge of protective anger. Rich Cunningham was a good soldier and a friend. He had 2 young kids with Stella. How far along is it? Early stages. But if Calvin's timeline holds, Rich is going to come home to the same nightmare you did. That night, Randall sat in his temporary apartment, a one-bedroom place above Kelly's bar, and began planning. Diana and Calvin thought they were dealing with a simple soldier, someone who'd roll over and accept defeat. They had no idea they'd just made an enemy of someone trained in unconventional warfare. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. A knock on his door revealed a nervous young woman with sandy blonde hair and worried eyes. "Are you Randall Gillespie?" she asked. "Depends who's asking. I'm Susanna Joseph. Calvin's my brother." Randall invited her in, offering coffee while studying her carefully. She had Calvin's features, but none of his apparent arrogance. "I heard what happened to you," she said, wrapping her hands around the coffee mug. "And I need to tell you something. Calvin, he's done this before. My ex-husband was in the Navy. Calvin helped me divorce him and take everything. Why are you telling me this?" Tears formed in her eyes. "Because I found out later that my husband never cheated on me. Calvin fabricated the evidence. He manipulated me into destroying my marriage so he could get his hands on my ex-husband's veterans benefits and our house. By the time I realized what happened, it was too late." She reached into her purse and pulled out a small digital recorder. Calvin keeps trophies. He records conversations with his marks, both the wives and their targets. He thinks it's funny. I managed to copy some of his files before I cut ties with him. Randall's pulse quickened. "What's on there?" "Conversations with Diana. Plans for your destruction. And evidence of at least 3 other cases, including what he's planning for Rich Cunningham's family." As Susanna played the recordings, Randall heard Diana's voice speaking with cold calculation about liquidating his assets, forging documents, and teaching that military robot a lesson about real life. But it was Calvin's voice that made Randall's blood run cold. The beauty of targeting military wives is they're already primed for resentment. A few months of the right attention, and they'll burn down their own lives just to spite their husbands. Soldiers are so noble, so trusting. They never see it coming. When the recordings ended, Susanna looked at Randall with desperate hope. "Can you stop him? I can't live with knowing he's about to destroy more families." Randall's smile was predatory. "Ma'am, stopping Calvin Joseph is going to be my pleasure." Chapter 3. Intelligence Gathering. For the next week, Randall conducted surveillance like he was preparing for a military operation. He rented a nondescript sedan and established observation points around Diana's house, Calvin's office, and the Ironclad Protection Services facility. What he discovered painted a picture of a sophisticated operation. Calvin Joseph wasn't just seducing military wives. He was running a multi-layered scheme that involved identity theft, insurance fraud, and money laundering through his various businesses. From his position across the street from Calvin's office, Randall watched Jeremy Duke and Lonnie Scott come and go. These weren't just bodyguards, they were intimidation specialists. Randall had seen their type before in war zones, men who enjoyed causing fear and pain. His military training had taught him that every enemy had weaknesses, and Calvin's weakness was his arrogance. The man kept detailed records of his schemes, thinking himself untouchable. Through Susanna, Randall learned that Calvin stored his trophies in a safe at his office. Not just recordings, but photographs, financial documents, and even items stolen from his victims. Randall's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Heard you're asking questions about me. Careful, soldier boy. You're already on thin ice with that restraining order. One wrong move, and you'll be in jail." See, instead of intimidating him, the message confirmed what Randall suspected. Calvin was monitoring his activities, which meant he was worried. Good. That afternoon, Randall received an unexpected call from Stella Cunningham, Rich's wife. "Mr. Gillespie? My husband told me to call you if I ever had any problems while he was deployed. I think I'm in trouble." They met at a coffee shop downtown. Stella was a petite woman with auburn hair and kind eyes that now held traces of confusion and guilt. "There's this man, Calvin Joseph. He's been so kind to me, helping with things around the house while Rich is gone. But lately, he's been saying things about Rich, about military marriages. He says Rich doesn't appreciate me, that I deserve better. Stella, listen to me carefully. Calvin Joseph is not your friend. He's a predator who targets military wives." Her face went pale. "But he's been so helpful. He even introduced me to this lawyer who says he can help me understand my financial options if things don't work out with Rich." "What lawyer?" "Jeremy Duke. He said that with Rich's military benefits in our house, I could be financially independent if I chose to be." Randall's hands clenched around his coffee cup. "Stella, They're setting you up exactly like they did me. In 6 months, Rich is going to come home to find out you've divorced him, taken everything, and left him with nothing. Tears began flowing down her cheeks. Oh God, what have I done? Calvin, he kissed me last week. I didn't stop him. I've been so lonely, and he made me feel special. How far has this gone? Not all the way. But Calvin's been taking pictures of us together. He says they're just memories, but now I'm wondering. Blackmail material, Randall said grimly. Stella, I need you to trust me. Can you do exactly what I tell you? She nodded through her tears. I want you to continue seeing Calvin, but I need you to wear this. He handed her a small device that looked like a decorative pin. It's a recording device. I need evidence of what he's really planning. What if he finds out? He won't. And Stella? If he pressures you for anything physical, you tell him you need time to think. String him along for another week. Can you do that? What are you going to do? Randall's smile was cold. I'm going to remind Calvin Joseph that some soldiers don't go down without a fight. That evening, Randall put his surveillance skills to work. Calvin's security company operated out of a converted warehouse on the outskirts of town. The building had standard commercial security, cameras, motion sensors, and electronic locks that would barely slow down someone with Randall's training. At 2 a.m., when the building was empty, Randall bypassed the security system and slipped inside. Calvin's office was on the second floor, a gaudy display of expensive furniture and trophies from his various schemes. The safe was exactly where Susanna had described, behind a painting of Calvin posing with a trophy fish. It was a high-end model, but Randall had been trained in safecracking during his special operations training. 20 minutes later, it swung open. Inside was a treasure trove of evidence. USB drives containing recordings, photographs of Calvin with various women, financial documents showing money transfers, and even personal items, wedding rings, jewelry, and military medals that clearly belonged to his victims. Randall photographed everything with a specialized camera before carefully replacing the items. But he took one item, a USB drive labeled Diana/Randy, that contained hours of recordings documenting the entire scheme. As he prepared to leave, Randall heard voices outside. Through the window, he saw Jeremy Duke and Lonnie Scott approaching the building. They were early for whatever they had planned. Randall moved silently through the building, using shadows and his knowledge of urban navigation to avoid detection. As he reached the fire exit, he heard Duke's voice echoing through the building. Boss wants us to send a message to that soldier boy. Thinks he's some kind of hero, asking questions around town. What kind of message? Scott's voice was eager, hungry, the kind that puts him in the hospital. Calvin says the guy's a problem, and problems need to be eliminated. Randall slipped out of the building with the evidence he needed. But now he knew Calvin was escalating. The time for subtle information gathering was over. It was time to go on the offensive. Back in his apartment, Randall spread out photographs and documents like a military intelligence briefing. Calvin Joseph had made one critical error. He'd declared war on someone who actually knew how to fight one. Randall opened his laptop and began typing. If Calvin wanted to play games, Randall would show him what a real tactical operation looked like. The next phase of his plan was about to begin. Chapter 4. The trap is set. 3 days later, Randall stood outside his former home, watching Jeremy Duke and Lonnie Scott patrol the yard like prison guards. The black Escalade was parked in his driveway, and through the windows, he could see Diana and Calvin moving around inside his house. Randall had sent a simple text an hour earlier. Coming to collect my personal belongings. Be there at 8 p.m. The response had been swift and predictable. You're in violation of the restraining order. Stay away or face consequences. But Randall wasn't concerned about legal consequences anymore. He'd spent the last 72 hours setting up a trap that would expose Calvin's entire operation while giving him the confrontation he'd been planning. At exactly 8 p.m., Randall walked up the driveway carrying a large duffel bag. Jeremy Duke, a man-mountain with tattooed arms and a permanent scowl, stepped into his path. You need to leave, soldier boy. Now. This is my house, Randall said calmly. I'm just collecting my belongings. Lonnie Scott, smaller but with the wiry build of a street fighter, circled around behind Randall. You heard him. Turn around and walk away. The front door opened, and Calvin Joseph stepped out with Diana beside him. Calvin was exactly what Randall had expected. Expensive suit, perfect hair, and the smug expression of a man who thought he'd already won. Randall Gillespie, Calvin said, his voice dripping with false concern. I heard you were having trouble accepting reality. Diana's moved on, friend. Time you did the same. It's amazing what passes for friendship these days, Randall replied, his military bearing straight and controlled. Taking another man's wife, stealing his money, forging legal documents. Where I come from, we call that theft and fraud. Calvin's smile faltered slightly. I don't know what you think you know. I know you've done this 4 times before. I know about the recordings you keep as trophies. I know you're currently working on Rich Cunningham's wife. Randall's voice remained steady, but his eyes were ice cold. And I know you made a mistake targeting the wrong soldier. Diana stepped forward, her face twisted with anger. You always were delusional, Randall. Always thinking you were better than everyone else because you wore a uniform. Well, guess what? Your uniform doesn't mean anything here. Actually, it means quite a lot, Randall said, glancing at his watch. Especially to the FBI task force that specializes in crimes against military personnel. Calvin's face went pale. You're bluffing. Am I? Randall pulled out his phone and pressed a button. This conversation has been streamed live to federal agents who are very interested in your business practices, Calvin. They're particularly interested in the identity theft, money laundering, and systematic targeting of military families. That's when Jeremy Duke made his mistake. With a growl of rage, he rushed forward, swinging a haymaker at Randall's head. Randall had been waiting for this moment. His military training kicked in as he ducked under the punch, grabbed Duke's extended arm, and used the big man's momentum to send him crashing into the garage door. Lonnie Scott pulled a collapsible baton from his jacket, but Randall was already moving. A quick strike to Scott's wrist sent the weapon flying, followed by a knee to the solar plexus that doubled him over. Within seconds, both men were on the ground, gasping for air. You have 5 seconds to leave, Randall said calmly, standing over them. Duke struggled to his feet, his nose bleeding. You think you're tough? We're going to. You're going to what? Randall's voice cut through the night air like a blade. You're going to threaten a decorated combat veteran on his own property? In front of witnesses? With federal agents monitoring this conversation? Both men looked uncertainly at Calvin, who was backing toward the house. Get up, Calvin hissed. Both of you. We're leaving. But before anyone could move, the sound of sirens filled the night air. Police cars rounded the corner, followed by unmarked federal vehicles. Timothy Thompson was the first officer out of his car. He surveyed the scene. 2 men on the ground, Randall standing calmly, and Calvin and Diana frozen by the front door. Evening, folks, Thompson said, his hand resting on his service weapon. We received reports of a disturbance. Officer, Calvin started, his composure cracking. This man attacked my employees. He's in violation of a restraining order. Funny thing about that restraining order, Thompson interrupted. Federal agents just informed us it was filed using fraudulent evidence. Turns out the threatening emails and phone calls never happened. 2 FBI agents approached, showing their badges. The lead agent, a stern woman with gray-streaked hair, spoke directly to Calvin. Calvin Joseph, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, identity theft, money laundering, and violation of federal laws protecting military personnel and their families. This is ridiculous, Calvin protested as the agents moved to handcuff him. I'm a respected businessman who keeps recorded confessions of his crimes in a safe, the agent said. We executed a search warrant an hour ago. Very thorough records, Mr. Joseph. You really should have invested in better security. Diana's face went white as the implications hit her. Calvin, what is she talking about? What recordings? One of the agents turned to her. Mrs. Gillespie, you're also under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud and filing false legal documents. But Calvin said this was all legal. He said the divorce proceedings were standard. Ma'am, forging your husband's signature and filing false restraining orders are felonies. The recorded conversations show you were aware these actions were illegal. As the agents led Calvin and Diana away in handcuffs, Jeremy Duke and Lonnie Scott found themselves surrounded by local police. You 2 are under arrest for assault, Thompson announced. And given your criminal records, you're looking at serious time. Duke glared at Randall. This isn't over, soldier boy. Thompson stepped between them. Actually, it is. And Mr. Duke? I'd suggest you remember that threatening military personnel, is a federal crime. We've had enough excitement for one evening. As the police cars drove away, Thompson approached Randall. Hell of a thing, the veteran cop said. How do you know the feds were listening? Randall held up his phone. I've been working with them for 3 days. Turns out Calvin Joseph's operation was much bigger than just targeting military wives. They've been building a case against him for 6 months. And the confrontation here. I needed him to incriminate himself on a federal recording. Sometimes the best way to catch a predator is to let him think he's cornered his prey. Thompson shook his head in admiration. Remind me never to cross you, Randy. As the scene cleared, Randall stood alone in front of his house. Through the windows, he could see the life he'd built, now empty and violated. But for the first time since returning from deployment, he felt a sense of control returning. The trap had worked perfectly. Calvin Joseph's arrogance had led him to confess everything on a federal recording. Diana's greed had been documented in detail. And Jeremy Duke and Lonnie Scott had assault charges that would put them away for years. But Randall wasn't finished. This was only the beginning of his revenge. Chapter 5. Unraveling the Network. The federal investigation moved swiftly. Within 48 hours, Calvin Joseph's entire operation was exposed in stunning detail. Randall sat in the FBI field office, watching as agents mapped out a conspiracy that stretched across 3 states and involved dozens of victims. Agent Carolina Delgado, the lead investigator, spread photographs across the conference table. Your intelligence was the key that cracked this open, Sergeant Gillespie. Calvin Joseph and his associates have been systematically targeting military families for over 3 years. How many victims? 14 confirmed cases, with probably more we haven't found yet. The pattern was always the same. Identify deployed military personnel, seduce their spouses, manipulate them into filing false domestic abuse claims, then strip the assets during fraudulent divorce proceedings. Randall studied the photographs of Calvin's victims, good soldiers who'd come home to find their lives destroyed. What's the recovery outlook? Most of the money can be traced and returned. Calvin was clever, but not clever enough to hide digital trails. Your friend Rich Cunningham is lucky you intervened when you did. We found evidence that Calvin planned to have his wife file divorce papers next week. Agent Delgado pulled out a thick file. But there's something else. Calvin's organization was part of a larger network. He had connections to similar operations in other states, all targeting military personnel. How large a network? We're talking about millions of dollars stolen from service members and their families. This goes beyond simple fraud. It's economic warfare against our military community. The door opened, and Susanna Joseph entered with her lawyer. She looked exhausted but determined. Ms. Joseph has agreed to full cooperation, the lawyer announced. She's prepared to testify about her brother's methods and provide access to additional evidence. Susanna looked directly at Randall. Calvin kept backup files at our family's cabin upstate. Financial records, photographs, even videos of him gloating about his victories. I want to help you bury him. Over the next several hours, Randall learned the full scope of Calvin's depravity. The man didn't just steal money. He destroyed families for sport. His recorded conversations revealed someone who took genuine pleasure in causing pain to military personnel, viewing them as suckers who deserve to be taught lessons about the real world. One recording particularly enraged Randall. Calvin's voice, speaking to Diana. The beauty of targeting soldiers is their rigid moral code. They believe in honor, loyalty, sacrifice, all weaknesses we can exploit. When they come home broken, it's just natural selection at work. Agent Delgado noticed Randall's clenched fists. I know this is personal, Sergeant, but we need you to stay focused on the legal process. I am focused, but Calvin Joseph needs to understand that actions have consequences. The legal consequences will be severe. He's looking at 25 years minimum. That's not enough. That evening, Randall received an unexpected visitor at his temporary apartment. Rich Cunningham had flown back from Syria on emergency leave after being briefed on the situation. Randy, I don't know how to thank you, Rich said, embracing his friend. Stella told me everything. If you hadn't intervened, any of us would have done the same thing. No, this was different. You went to war for all of us. Rich pulled out a bottle of whiskey. Stella wanted me to give you this. She also wanted me to tell you that she's filing a detailed report about Calvin's attempted seduction. The FBI wants her testimony. They sat in silence for a moment. drinking and processing the magnitude of what had been uncovered. "There's something else," Rich said. "Word's getting around the military community about what you did. Some of Calvin's other victims want to meet with you." The next day, Randall found himself in a VFW hall surrounded by 7 men, all soldiers whose lives had been destroyed by Calvin Joseph's network. Each had a similar story: deployed overseas, wife seduced and manipulated, returning home to find themselves financially ruined and legally trapped. Fernando Cooper, a Navy SEAL, spoke for the group. "We want justice, Randy. Real justice. The legal system will give Calvin a prison sentence, but that doesn't restore our families or our honor." "What are you suggesting?" "We're suggesting that Calvin Joseph needs to understand what it feels like to lose everything," said Robert Hancock, an Army Ranger. "His assets, his reputation, his freedom, his sense of security, everything." Marco Benjamin, a Marine Corps veteran, leaned forward. "We've been researching Calvin's business interests. He's got money hidden in offshore accounts, properties under shell companies, and investments that weren't part of the FBI seizure." "That sounds like vigilante justice," Randall said carefully. "That sounds like asset recovery," Fernando corrected. "Calvin stole from military families. We're just ensuring those families get everything they're owed." Ramon Rowe, a former Green Beret, spread out documents on the table. "Calvin's got a yacht in the Bahamas, a condo in Miami, an art collection worth $500,000. None of it was reported to federal authorities." Randall studied the documents. His military training had taught him to think strategically, and Calvin's hidden assets represented an opportunity for real justice. "What's the plan?" Over the next 2 hours, the group outlined a sophisticated operation to recover Calvin's hidden assets and redistribute them to his victims. It would require careful coordination, technical expertise, and the kind of unconventional tactics they'd all learned in military service. "One more thing," Fernando said as the meeting concluded. "Calvin's been making noise from jail about how this isn't over. His lawyer's been visiting other criminals, talking about hiring people to send a message to you." "Let him try," Randall said. "I'm done hiding from men like Calvin Joseph." As the other veterans filed out, Rich Cunningham lingered behind. "Randy, are you sure about this? Taking on Calvin's hidden assets is risky. If you get caught..." "Rich, Calvin Joseph declared war on our community. He targeted our families while we were serving our country. Sometimes the only way to stop a bully is to hit back harder than he ever imagined possible." That night, Randall began planning phase 2 of his campaign against Calvin Joseph. The legal system would handle the criminal charges, but Randall intended to ensure that Calvin understood the true cost of his actions. Calvin had made one critical error in his assessment of military personnel. He'd confused honor with weakness. Now he was about to learn the difference between a soldier and a warrior. Chapter 6: The Hunter Becomes Hunted. Calvin Joseph's first week in federal detention was not going as he'd expected. His high-priced lawyer, Kerry Wagner, had managed to get him placed in a minimum security facility while awaiting trial. But even there, word of his crimes had spread. "Your situation is deteriorating," Wagner told him during a visit. "The federal prosecutors have overwhelming evidence, and your former associates are lining up to testify against you. What about bail?" "Denied. The judge considers you a flight risk given the offshore accounts we're still discovering." Calvin's polished facade was cracking. "This is all Randall Gillespie's fault. That military psychopath manipulated the entire situation. Actually, the evidence suggests Sergeant Gillespie simply exposed crimes you'd already committed. My recommendation is that we negotiate a plea deal." "Absolutely not. I want Gillespie dealt with." Wagner leaned back in his chair. "Calvin, what exactly are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that Sergeant Gillespie has made powerful enemies. Jeremy Duke and Lonnie Scott have friends on the outside. Perhaps those friends might be interested in sending a message. I cannot and will not facilitate any threats against." "You'll do what I pay you to do?" Calvin snapped. "I've been building this operation for years. I'm not going to let some damaged soldier destroy everything." What Calvin didn't know was that his conversation was being monitored. Agent Carolina Delgado had obtained a warrant to record his communications after intelligence suggested he was planning retaliation. The next morning, Randall received a call from Agent Delgado. "We need to meet immediately. Calvin Joseph is escalating." They met at the FBI field office, where Delgado played the recording of Calvin's conversation with his lawyer. He's trying to arrange attacks on you, she said. We're taking this threat seriously. What about protective custody? Available if you want it. But given your background, I suspect you might prefer a more proactive approach. Randall smiled grimly. What did you have in mind? We let Calvin think his plan is working while we gather evidence of witness intimidation and conspiracy to commit assault. But we need you to act as bait. I've been bait before. What's the setup? Over the next hour, they planned an operation that would allow Calvin's associates to make their move while federal agents documented everything. Randall would appear vulnerable, alone, and distracted while actually being surrounded by backup. That evening, Randall sat alone at O'Malley's bar, apparently drinking heavily and looking despondent. Kelly Brooks, who was in on the plan, served him ginger ale disguised as whiskey while maintaining the illusion of a broken man drowning his sorrows. The setup worked perfectly. At 10 p.m., 3 men entered the bar. Randall recognized one of them, Pablo Reed, an associate of Jeremy Duke, who'd been spotted at Calvin's security company. The men tried to look casual, but their body language screamed violence. Randall continued his act of being drunk and distracted while mentally cataloging their positions and potential weapons. Pablo Reed approached the bar. You Randall Gillespie? Depends who's asking, Randall slurred. We're friends of Jeremy Duke. He asked us to deliver a message. Duke's in jail. Not for long. And when he gets out, he's going to remember everyone who put him there. Reed's companions moved to flank Randall, cutting off escape routes. The bar's other patrons, all undercover agents, maintained their positions. Here's the message, Reed continued. Drop the charges against Calvin Joseph, stop cooperating with the feds, and disappear. Otherwise, accidents start happening to people you care about. Randall looked up from his drink, his eyes suddenly clear and focused. And if I refuse? Then we start with your girlfriend behind the bar, move on to your friend Rich Cunningham's family, and eventually work our way back to you. That was enough. Randall stood up slowly, no longer pretending to be drunk. Gentlemen, you've just made a serious mistake. Reed pulled a knife from his jacket. The only mistake was thinking you were smart enough to. He never finished the sentence. Randall's training kicked in as he disarmed Reed with brutal efficiency, sending the knife flying while simultaneously striking the man's throat. The other 2 attackers moved in, but found themselves facing someone they hadn't expected. Instead of a broken soldier, they were fighting a special operations veteran who'd survived 3 combat tours. Within 30 seconds, all 3 men were on the floor, restrained by FBI agents who'd emerged from their positions around the bar. Agent Delgado approached, shaking her head in amazement. I've never seen anyone move that fast. They made it easy, Randall said, straightening his shirt. Amateurs always underestimate their opponents. Pablo Reed was dragged to his feet, blood streaming from his nose. This isn't over, soldier boy. Actually, it is, Agent Delgado said. Conspiracy to commit assault, intimidation of a federal witness, and criminal threats. You're looking at 10 years minimum. As the agents led the attackers away, Kelly Brooks poured Randall a real whiskey. Feel better? She asked. Getting there. How's the audio quality? Crystal clear. Calvin Joseph's lawyer is going to have an interesting conversation with federal prosecutors tomorrow. The next morning brought news that exceeded even Randall's expectations. Calvin's lawyer, Kerry Wagner, had immediately withdrawn from the case after learning about the recorded conversations. Without Wagner's protection, Calvin was moved to general population, where his crimes against military families had made him extremely unpopular. Agent Delgado called with an update. Calvin Joseph was attacked in his cell last night. Nothing life-threatening, but apparently, even criminals have standards when it comes to targeting military families. What's his status now? Protective custody, and suddenly very interested in that plea deal his lawyer recommended. He's also providing information about the broader network in exchange for federal protection. And his assets? We've located an additional $4 million in hidden accounts and properties. Combined with our earlier seizures, we'll be able to provide full restitution to all victims. Randall felt a satisfaction deeper than anything he'd experienced since returning from deployment. Calvin Joseph's empire was crumbling, his associates were facing serious prison time, and his victims were getting their lives back. But there was one more piece of business to handle. Diana. Chapter 7. Confronting the Past. Diana Gillespie sat in the county jail's visiting room, looking nothing like the polished woman who'd once graced society pages. 3 weeks in custody had stripped away her artifice, revealing someone hollow and desperate beneath the surface. Randall entered the visiting room carrying a manila folder. It was the first time they'd been face-to-face since the night of arrests, and Diana's reaction was immediate, a mixture of fear, anger, and something that might have been regret. "You came," she said quietly. "You asked me to." Diana had sent a letter through her court-appointed attorney, requesting a meeting. Against his better judgment and Agent Delgado's advice, Randall had agreed. "I suppose you're here to gloat," Diana said, her voice brittle. "I'm here because you said you had something to tell me." She was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. "Calvin recorded everything, didn't he? All our conversations, all our plans." "Yes." "Then you know the truth. You know that I—" She trailed off, unable to finish. "That you what, Diana?" "That I hated you," she whispered. "I hated what our marriage had become. I hated being alone while you played hero overseas. I hated feeling like I came second to your precious military career." Randall opened the folder and pulled out a photograph, their wedding picture, taken 5 years ago. Both of them young, smiling, full of hope for their future together. "When did it start?" he asked. "The hatred. Your second deployment. You were gone for 15 months, and I was here alone. Do you know what that's like? Being married to someone who's never there." "I was serving my country." "You were serving yourself," she snapped, then caught herself. "I'm sorry. I know that's not fair, but that's how it felt." Randall studied her face, looking for traces of the woman he'd fallen in love with. "When did you meet Calvin?" "About a year ago. He was charming, attentive. He made me feel like I mattered, like I was more than just a military wife waiting for her husband to come home." "And the plan to destroy me?" Diana's composure cracked. "That was Calvin's idea. He said you were using me, that military men were all the same. He said I deserved better than being abandoned for some misguided sense of duty. But you went along with it." "Yes." The word came out as a sob. "I went along with it because I was angry, because I felt betrayed, because Calvin made it sound like justice." Randall pulled out another document, the forged deed to their house. "You practiced my signature for weeks. Calvin taught me how. He said it wasn't really theft because I was entitled to half of everything anyway." "And the restraining order?" "The false abuse claims." Diana looked away. "Calvin said no one would believe a decorated soldier could be abusive. He said it would be easy to make the charges stick because military men are trained to be violent." "Did you ever love me, Diana?" The question hung in the air between them. When Diana finally answered, her voice was barely audible. "I did love you. In the beginning. But somewhere along the way, that love turned into resentment, and Calvin helped me turn that resentment into hatred." Randall pulled out the final item from his folder, divorce papers. "These are real divorce papers," he said. "Fair division of assets. No false claims, no fraud. Just an honest end to our marriage." Diana stared at the papers. "Why?" "Because despite everything you've done, I don't want to spend the rest of my life hating you. And because somewhere under all this bitterness and manipulation, there might still be the woman I married. The prosecutor says I'm looking at 5 years minimum. Probably. But with cooperation and good behavior, you could be out in 3. And then what? Who's going to want someone who did what I did?" Randall stood up. "That's not my problem anymore, Diana. You made your choices, and now you have to live with the consequences." "Randall, wait." She looked up at him with desperate eyes. "I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I am genuinely sorry. I know you are. But sorry doesn't give me back 5 years of marriage, or my savings, or my trust in people. Can you ever forgive me?" Randall paused at the door. "Someday, maybe. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, and it doesn't mean there won't be consequences." As he left the jail, Randall felt a weight lifting from his shoulders. The conversation hadn't provided closure exactly, but it had provided clarity. Diana was a broken person who'd made terrible choices, but she was no longer his responsibility. His phone buzzed with a text from Agent Delgado. Calvin Joseph just accepted a plea deal. 25 years, full cooperation, complete asset forfeiture. It's over. Randall smiled as he walked to his car. Calvin Joseph's network was destroyed, his victims were getting justice, and the threat to military families had been eliminated. But as he drove away from the jail, Randall realized his work wasn't finished. There were other predators out there, other schemes targeting vulnerable military families. Maybe it was time to start thinking about the future. Chapter 8. New Beginnings. 6 months after Calvin Joseph's arrest, Randall stood in the living room of his restored house, watching as moving trucks carried away the last of Diana's belongings. The Federal Asset Recovery Program had returned everything Calvin had stolen, and Diana's lawyer had agreed to a fair property settlement that left Randall with the house and most of their shared assets. The house felt different now, cleaner somehow, as if the exposure of Calvin's schemes had purged it of negative energy. Randall had spent weeks repainting, replacing furniture, and eliminating any trace of the betrayal that had taken place within these walls. Timothy Thompson knocked on the front door, carrying a 6-pack of beer and wearing civilian clothes. "Thought you might want some company for the final cleanup," the veteran cop said. They sat on the back porch, watching the sun set over the neighborhood where Randall had thought he'd build a life with Diana. "Any word on the other victims?" Thompson asked. "All the stolen money has been returned. Most of the guys are rebuilding their lives." Fernando Cooper started a nonprofit to help military families avoid predatory schemes. Rich Cunningham and Stella renewed their wedding vows last month. And Diana? Sentenced to 4 years, out in 2 with good behavior. She's being transferred to a federal facility in Ohio next week. Thompson took a swig of beer. "You ever wonder what would have happened if you just accepted the situation, moved on, started over somewhere else?" "Every day. But then I think about Rich Cunningham's kids, or Fernando Cooper's family, or all the other soldiers who might have come home to find their lives destroyed. No regrets. About stopping Calvin? None. About the marriage." Randall paused. "I regret not seeing the signs earlier. I regret prioritizing military service over communication with my wife. I regret that our relationship deteriorated to the point where she was vulnerable to someone like Calvin. That's not all your fault." "No, but it's not all Diana's fault either. Marriage requires 2 people, and I was gone for most of ours." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment before Thompson spoke again. "So what's next for Master Sergeant Gillespie?" Randall pulled out a letter from his pocket. "I got an offer from the FBI. They want me to join a task force that investigates crimes targeting military families. Apparently, Calvin's network was bigger than we thought. You going to take it?" "I think so. Turns out I'm good at hunting predators." The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Susanna Joseph stood on Randall's front porch, looking nervous but determined. "I wanted to thank you," she said, "and to apologize for my brother's actions." "You have nothing to apologize for. You helped expose him. I also wanted you to know that I've been working with the FBI to identify other victims. Calvin kept detailed records going back years." She handed him a thick folder. "There are at least 20 more families that were targeted. Most of them never knew what really happened." Randall flipped through the files, seeing familiar patterns: deployed soldiers, seduced wives, destroyed marriages, stolen assets. "Some of these cases are from before Calvin's operation," Susanna continued. "There are other people out there running similar schemes. How many others? We're not sure yet. But Agent Delgado thinks this could be a nationwide problem." That afternoon, Randall met with Agent Delgado at the FBI field office to discuss the expanded investigation. "The task force position would involve traveling extensively," she explained. "We're identifying similar operations in Texas, California, North Carolina, and Florida, all targeting military communities. What would my role be?" "You'd work undercover, identifying the schemes and gathering evidence. Your military background and personal experience with these predators make you uniquely qualified. And the risks? Significant. These aren't just con artists. Some of these operations involve organized crime, human trafficking, and money laundering. You'd be going after dangerous people." Randall thought about Rich Cunningham's children, about the soldiers whose lives had been destroyed while they served their country, about the families torn apart by predators who saw military service as weakness to exploit. "When do I start?" 3 weeks later, Randall stood in the departure lounge at the airport, waiting for a flight to San Antonio. His first assignment involved investigating a scheme targeting soldiers at Fort Sam Houston, an operation that bore striking similarities to Calvin Joseph's methods. As he waited to board, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Randy, this is Stella Cunningham. Rich and I wanted you to know that our son was born this morning. We named him Randall. Thank you for saving our family. We'll never forget what you did." Randall smiled as he boarded the plane. Calvin Joseph had thought military personnel were easy targets because of their sense of honor and duty. What Calvin hadn't understood was that these same qualities made soldiers formidable enemies when their families were threatened. The fight against predators who targeted military families was just beginning, but Randall was ready for the battle. Chapter 9, Justice Served. 1 year after Calvin Joseph's arrest, Randall sat in a federal courtroom watching as the final member of the conspiracy received his sentence. Pablo Reed, the man who'd threatened him in O'Malley's bar, was led away in handcuffs after receiving 8 years for witness intimidation and conspiracy. The scope of what they'd uncovered was staggering. Calvin Joseph's network had connections to similar operations in 12 states, resulting in over 200 victims and $50 million in stolen assets. The FBI task force that Randall now led had become a model for investigating crimes against military families. Agent Carolina Delgado approached him as the courtroom emptied. "That's the last of them," she said. "Calvin's entire operation is dismantled. What about the broader network?" 73 arrests across 6 states. The Justice Department is calling it the largest prosecution of organized fraud against military families in history. Randall nodded, feeling a deep satisfaction. Calvin Joseph's 25-year sentence was just the beginning. They'd exposed and destroyed an entire industry built on exploiting military families. Any word on Calvin himself? He's been moved to maximum security after the 3rd attack from other inmates. Apparently, targeting military families isn't popular even among criminals. As they left the courthouse, Randall spotted a familiar figure waiting by his car. Diana Gillespie looked different, thinner, wearing a simple dress instead of designer clothes, her hair shorter and less styled. She'd been released from federal prison 2 months ago. "Hello, Randall," she said quietly. "Diana, I heard you were out. I wanted to thank you." "For what?" "For the divorce settlement. For not pressing additional charges." "For," she struggled with the words. "For not destroying me completely when you had the chance." They stood in awkward silence for a moment before Diana continued. "I'm working at a homeless shelter in Ohio, helping women who've made bad choices, like I did. It's not much, but it's something." "That's good. I'm glad you're rebuilding. I also wanted you to know that I testified against Calvin's appeal. I told them everything, how he manipulated me, how he planned the whole scheme, how he enjoyed destroying military families." "Why?" "Because you were right. There have to be consequences for our actions. And because Calvin Joseph is a predator who deserves to rot in prison." Diana pulled an envelope from her purse. "These are the original recordings Calvin made of our conversations. The FBI had copies, but I thought you should have the originals." Randall took the envelope without opening it. "What will you do now?" "Keep working at the shelter. Try to make amends, somehow. I know I can't undo what I did, but maybe I can prevent other women from making the same mistakes." "And Calvin's other victims?" "I've been reaching out to them, offering to testify in civil cases if they want to pursue additional damages. It's the least I can do." As Diana walked away, Randall felt something he hadn't expected, a sense of completion. The woman he'd married was gone, destroyed by bitterness and manipulation. But perhaps something better had emerged from the ruins. That evening, Randall returned to his house, fully restored now, with new furniture and fresh paint that had erased all traces of Calvin's violation. The place felt like home again. His phone rang. Rich Cunningham's voice was excited. "Randy, turn on Channel 7. They're doing a special report on the task force." Randall switched on the television to see Agent Delgado being interviewed about their success in dismantling the conspiracy. The breakthrough came when Sergeant Randall Gillespie refused to accept that predators could target military families with impunity, she was saying. His courage and determination led to the largest prosecution of this type of crime in American history. The report went on to detail the scope of Calvin's network and the recovery of stolen assets. It featured interviews with several victims whose lives had been restored through the investigation. Fernando Cooper appeared on screen, speaking about his nonprofit organization. "What Randall taught us is that soldiers don't have to be victims. We can fight back, we can protect each other, and we can ensure that predators face consequences for their actions." The segment concluded with footage of Calvin Joseph being led into federal prison, followed by statistics about the task force's ongoing work. Randall's phone buzzed with congratulatory messages from fellow veterans, FBI colleagues, and victim families. The case had become a symbol of justice for military communities across the country. But for Randall, the real victory wasn't the media attention or professional recognition. It was the knowledge that families like Rich Cunningham's were safe, that soldiers could deploy without fear of coming home to destroyed lives, and that predators who saw military service as weakness had learned a hard lesson about the strength of those who wear the uniform. A year ago, he'd returned from deployment to find his life in ruins. Tonight, he sat in his restored home, leading a federal task force that protected military families, surrounded by the respect of his peers and the gratitude of those he'd helped. Calvin Joseph had thought he was targeting an easy mark, a simple soldier who would accept defeat and fade away. Instead, he'd awakened something far more dangerous, a warrior with a mission. The mission was far from over. There were other predators out there, other schemes to uncover, other families to protect. But Calvin Joseph's network was finished. His victims had justice, and military families across the country were safer because one soldier had refused to accept that honor was weakness. As Randall prepared for bed, he looked at a framed photo on his nightstand, not of Diana, but of his unit from Afghanistan. Good soldiers who'd trusted him to have their backs in combat, just as he'd had theirs. The war against those who preyed on military families was a different kind of combat, but the principles remained the same. Protect your brothers and sisters in arms, never leave a fallen comrade behind, and ensure that those who threaten your family face overwhelming and decisive retaliation. Calvin Joseph had learned that lesson the hard way, and his example would serve as a warning to anyone else who thought military families were easy targets. The soldier had come home, and justice had been served. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.